Ok, hola a todos, bienvenidos de nuevo al Product Tank Bogotá. Vamos a dar unos minutos para que la gente se vaya conectando. Mientras tanto, pueden ir votando en nuestra encuesta del día de hoy. ¿Cuántas veces ha venido al Product Tank? Esperemos que hayan venido al de Bogotá varias veces. Si han ido a otros también, ahora que está todo remoto, pues también voten allí y tienen una opción. ¿Sí? Entonces, vamos a dejarle la encuesta unos minuticos mientras preparamos para la presentación de hoy de Adam Thomas, que se trata de Survival Metrics, métricas de supervivencia. Y bueno, hola a todos. Vamos a comenzar con la sesión del día de hoy. Hoy me acompaña el compañero Oscar, eh, también organizador acá. Eh, el, el- el Twitter de él es Dura, ¿cómo termina, Oscar?
Durán Oscar F.
Durán Oscar F, el mío es Product Blinch, y el de Adam se los va a compartir cuando venga su presentación. Adam ha trabajado en producto desde hace mucho tiempo, es director de producto en una empresa en Estados Unidos y últimamente se ha dedicado mucho a escribir y a publicar artículos relacionados a el product management. O sea, Adam, welcome to Product Tank Bogotá. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Thank you, Ricardo. So my name is Adam Thomas. I have been doing product for about 15 years, working with companies like Google, Casper, and DTCC, helping them build solutions and launch product teams. Currently, I am the lead product manager at Recruiters, helping them build an enterprise function servicing countries across NAMER and EMEA. And very excited to be here today. Well, since Ricardo was on mute, I think that was a go ahead for me to begin the presentation. So we're going to jump right in to survival metrics. How to be fast, data informed, and politically safe. My first question to you is, does your team trust you? And I want you to sit with that for a minute while I introduce a company called Bobco. We're going to go back to the year 2015. And in 2015, Bobco was a fairly successful fintech company. They had $6 million US in the bank profit. They had pretty high NPS scores, so customer satisfaction was quite high, and company morale was doing well. And in fact, they hadn't lost anyone in years. And so Bobco was riding on a high. And as a result, at the end of the year, leadership got together and decided they were going to plan out the next 2 years. And in those 2 years, they were going to do two things. One, they were going to do a refactor of their entire infrastructure in order to prepare for a chatbot initiative, because chatbots were something that was very, very good at the time, very exciting new technology that they wanted to implement. And so with that in mind, and all of the positives they had in the world, they did a lot of strategy up front and decided to go after those things without any questions over the next 2 years. And so where were they 2 years later, after they hired, structured, and built out the plan? They had to do layoffs. The company had to lay off 50% of their workforce, including the people they had just hired. The modernization that they had planned had been over budget by 200%. The chatbot that they built just confused customers, and it dropped the NPS from 40, which is excellent, to 0, which is middling. And morale was awful. For those that stuck around, they were pointing fingers. They'd just seen a lot of their friends leave, some old, some new, and were wondering, what just happened? How did they get from a company that was not super successful, but successful, right? Positive cash flow, high customer satisfaction, and high morale, to a company that was hemorrhaging cash, had confused customers, and low internal trust? How did they get there? And then once they ended up there, it wasn't just those things. The company that they were in culturally was in shambles, and they committed the number one sin that a company as a startup or enterprise or any company could commit. They wasted time. And so as a company, there's one thing you can't buy, and that is time. 2 years is forever in any business. And so without understanding what they were doing or how they were doing it, they just did a lot of strategy up front. So they got together and made that 2-year plan. They didn't have anything in play to help them stop or adjust. They just flowed, they just went with the plan. And as a result, not just did they waste time externally, but also internally. They had a lot of cultural scars that existed because of that. Teams were unable or unsure if they could even make decisions in 2017. They had no data clarity. Everything was gut-based, and that left teams confused on who to trust and where to trust it, especially after the layoffs. And the company values weren't applied anywhere during and after the layoffs. So everything felt very flimsy. It felt unsure when times were hard, as they were in 2017. All because they didn't know what to build, or they didn't adjust. And so that's not an anecdote. A lot of companies end up building things that people do not need. In fact, as you can see here, it's a top 20 reason why startups fails. And in fact, it's really up there. It's about number 2. And as companies get more complex and the world that we're in gets more complex, we're in a place where we can't afford to build things that people don't need. There's a competitor around the corner. Now, there's the Agile Manifesto. The Agile Manifesto is supposed to help us figure this out, right? And for those who don't know, the Agile Manifesto is really 4 tenets. It's these four tenets that launched 8,000 ships. These are the things that every company talks about when they're talking about agile. Nothing else. Everything else is an abstraction, right? So these four things, and we'll read them now. Individuals and interactions over processes and tools, working software over comprehensive documentation, customer collaboration over contract negotiation, and responding to change over following a plan. Now, remember what Bobco did. In 2015, they took their successes and decided on a plan and did not intend to react at all with what was happening. And so that's what I want to double click on today. I want to double click on responding to change over following a plan. And so as we think about that right now, I want to talk about the tenets of change. So let's put ourselves on a desert island. On a desert island, when you want to be able to change your environment, I think there are three things you have to be very clear about. Three mental models that you have to have in order to be able to increase your confidence of survival. The first one is being fast. You need to be able to make decisions quickly. Is this healthy? Is this not? The more decisions you can make quickly, more precisely, with higher confidence, the more likely you're going to survive because you're going to learn. And of those learnings, you're going to get better at what you're doing. Next is you need to be data informed, meaning you need to be able to think about reality. What's real? And so you don't want to drink sand and eat water. You need to know what you're doing or what's around you. And lastly is being politically safe. You need to understand what's around you. You do not want to swim upstream. The more you swim upstream, the less energy you have, and the more scared you get because you just don't have the energy. So it's extremely important to be able to negotiate what's around you, whether it's other people, whether it's nature, whatever it is. And business is no different. As Bobco, and where they ended up in 2017, they weren't able to adjust. There was no decision velocity. They weren't really fast. They weren't very data informed. As I said before, they were very gut based. No one knew what data meant, nor did they have the context around it. And it wasn't politically safe. People were pointing fingers. They weren't thinking about the group as a whole and how to move and be honest with their incentives. And so if you want to be able to adjust, like the Agile Manifesto tells you to, you need to be focused on these pillars of change. You'll need to build on them effectively. And so let's go a little deeper here on these three pillars and these mental models. So fast is all about your decision velocity. And your decision velocity increases when you make your decisions smaller, pre-made, and simple. The idea is that you want to make your decisions quicker and you want to reduce the amount of risk. And the way you do that is decomplexing or making more simple the decisions that you make. So I worked with a SaaS company that was similar to Bobco in this regard. Teams were unsure about where and how they could make decisions. And in fact, because of that, they were frozen. They were shipping very slowly, about one feature a quarter. And then after we talked about that decision velocity and clarified what the decision trees were and simplified them in a way that people can make them fast and without risk, they were shipping 6 times faster with the same people. It's just a matter of being very clear about the decisions and getting in that mental model where you're understanding that what decisions mean and how to make them quickly. A friend of mine, Mikal Lewis, calls this the coin flip test. Right? Generally, if you can make your decisions coin flips, you're in a very good place. You think about a coin flip is very non-consequential, right? It's very simple. You want to be data informed. So you want to increase the data information around the company by servicing decisions, being clear about the type of data, and leaving a decision trail. Peter Drucker talked about if what's not measured is not managed. And so as product people, there's a level of getting us or the companies around us to be more informed by writing out what's in front of us. My theory on product management is that our jobs, the number one job that a product manager has, is to increase the decision fitness of those around them. Meaning, how can we make sure that we're making better decisions consistently? And so, how can you do that without writing out your decisions or keeping an audit trail? You can't do that, right? You can't do that if you don't understand what data you're working with. There are different rules for quantitative and qualitative data. You have to treat them accordingly. And no hiding data, no hiding incentives. All the data that changes the status of a product should be put in front of the people that care about it. Private data doesn't do anybody any good. So the data that matters to people, make that available to them. And so I was working with a social impact startup, and their head of product, she was unsure how to define projects, right? They were trying to raise money and they just didn't have a very clear way of defining projects. And so I worked with her in getting that mental model in place. And afterwards, they were able to create a baseline for the projects that they were going after to help them understand if it was a incentive driven, if it was an investment, what type of project was it, right? And how to frame that story for the venture capitalists that they were looking to raise from. And so they raised around fairly quickly after that. And then you want to be politically safe, right? There's a buzzword that's out, psychological safety. Psychological safety is, right, this idea that we have to feel safe in our environment privately before we interact. I think political safety is one, if you take that and move it to the team level. And so if teams feel comfortable telling the truth, then you're going to get a better workplace. And so how do you increase that? You increase that by living your values, combining your culture with data, and making sure every voice is heard. Now, I don't believe in this idea that product managers are the CEOs, but they do share a job in one respect, which is great CEOs know what's happening in a company. They have a sense of pulse. And I think product managers need to have that same level of communication open to the company to understand where the winds are going, what's happening. And so in order to get there, you need to understand your values, reiterate and engage with them often. That data and ideas should live with the culture. It shouldn't be, ideas and data should not be separate from who you are. And again, you have to go talk to different teams, understand what drives them. What's their incentive model? What are they doing here? And by understanding that, you can make things politically safe. And so I worked with an enterprise company where product and sales were clashing. Imagine that, product and sales clashing, right? They were unsure of each other's incentive. And afterwards, product and sales understood each other by just talking and just bringing up to speed that, you know, product needs to understand data. So if the sales team is not bringing back data to help align their decision making, then product can't really react or respond the way they want to. And sales has to go drive revenue, right? That's how they feed their families. And so product not understanding that and sales not understanding that on a human level drove them against each other because sales felt like product was just coming out with things haphazardly and product felt like sales was just dropping demands. Once they understood each other, they were able to talk and have the right conversations at the right time. And so we're going to take a break here. And I'm curious, which one of these pillars do you feel your team could improve upon? Write it in the chat. And for bonus points, write out why. Why does your team need to improve here? I will go mute. All right. And so I see a couple answers like data informed, right? I think data is extremely important, and maybe the hardest pillar for some teams because it requires a different way of thinking about how we access, deal with, and understand data. To do it right requires an investment of time and energy. And so something to really think about as we move forward in this presentation is how can you commit to being data informed in your organization, thinking about the mental model. So let's continue. And let's go back to Bobco. Bobco's hanging around. They're still trudging in there, although they had a really rough 2017. There's still an opportunity to fix, right? They're not out of the fight yet. And so what Bobco is looking at is this, right? In 2015, they went from very positive to 2017, they're looking very negative. Like what does that mean? Who are we, right? What type of company do we think we are? And so when 2017 happened, they got rid of their product staff. Unfortunately for all of us, some of us may know, right? When things like this happen, we tend to be the first to go. And sometimes that's good. Sometimes it's time for us to move on. However, the founders got together and they figured out they needed a new head of product. They need somebody to get this all together. And so who did they hire? They hired Jill. And they gave Jill a mandate. Look, you're going to come in and you're going to have to change the organization from what it is. Not just what we deliver, but the culture. We're in a bad place. We need you to come in and get to work. And so Jill came in and got to work. And within 2 years, Bobco was successful. In fact, they got out of the red and stabilized their finances. They were able to change their pricing strategy. They were more data informed. The teams felt comfortable in talking about data and politically safe. Everybody was talking. When you walked into the office at Bobco, you saw teams talking. People were talking, right? And so how did she get there, right? She really focused on these 3 pillars of change. The 3 mental models we talked about earlier about being fast, data informed, and politically safe. She took some time to get to know the company and then focused on those things, right? Remember, if you want to change, you'll need to build on these 3 pillars to change effectively. And so it's not just enough to talk about it. How did she make this real, right? How did she increase decision velocity? How did she communicate clearly? And how did she unearth incentives, right? It's one thing to talk about operationalizing these ideas. And when you go to things like this, it's very easy to fall into this, to feel good, but how do you actually do it, right? How do you actually make this real? And so there are a couple questions that you have to keep in your head. How can you move fast realistically? How do you communicate in a way that people avoid finger pointing? And how do you unearth what people care about in a way that matters to folks? And so Jill thought about that for about 6 months when she first got there. And she decided to really understand the company with those 3 questions in mind. And after about 6 months, she sat there and learned and called an all hands. And at the all hands meeting, she talked about the pillars of change. And then afterwards, she put a slide up called survival metrics. And what are survival metrics? Well, survival metrics are a way to communicate these things in a way that helps you avoid sunk cost fallacy, because survival metrics are there to tell you if you need to invest, if you need to pivot or stop an idea from happening in the middle of the project. right? This is different than success metrics. Metrics measure the success of if an initiative is worth it or not. These are survival metrics. These help you decide if you should keep working on something and if you should pivot and move on. And so as we talked about before, there are these three major buckets, right? Remember, with FAST, you need to be able to talk about it in a way that is simple and predefined. If I tell somebody stop, pivot, and invest, they know what those things mean very clearly. There's no need to squabble about what they mean, right? We can squabble about severity, but you understand what the action has to be, right? So, right, if something's worth stopping, stop. If something's worth pivoting, move, right? Get together and talk about how you want to move. And if something's worth investing in, invest. Let's double down. Let's figure out where we need to go, right? And so let's talk about that speed. Because in 2017, Bobco was in a place where they were unsure if they could make decisions, and the decision velocity was slow. They put that in place, right? To stop, pivot, and invest. And by 2019, after getting comfortable with the idea that these decisions are able to change and they're simple, right? The decision tree is simple. They were able to change direction and do what I think a hallmark of a really mature company, a really mature product organization is, which is kill projects. I want you to think about the last project you were asked to decommission or kill. And if you haven't done so yet, I would argue that you're pretty early in your career, or you haven't been in a place that had committed to product strategy. Think about it this way. What MVP have you made that was correct in the first go? I can't think of a single one in my 15-year career. I can't think of something that was always worth it, even after I iterated over and over and over again. Sometimes things don't work. And so if you're not able or don't have permission to kill something, how can you say you have a product strategy? Worth thinking about. Being data informed, right? And so Jill really worked with the teams to start having data informed metrics inside of projects that focused on the problems that existed with the data informed, with focused on the problems itself, right? So, for example, soft statements started sounding like, if problem definition research is not aligned with more than 35% of our participants, that means the problem isn't clear to our users and we're wasting our time, right? That goes back to the initial issue, where are we solving problems that matter to customers, right? If we aren't, then let's not be afraid of saying, we thought about this wrong. Let's go back, right? If the AWS bill is projected to jump more than 10% due to a production release, we need to discuss ways to lower the projected bill immediately, right? And so that means, hey, our AWS bill, it's high, right? Remember our infrastructure issue? We were at double our spend. So let's think about that as we build, right? And so we need to talk about it. Is this worth the investment? Let's discuss. And so for an invest statement, they cared about their invite population. And so if we're projecting and it's really killing it, if it's twice our current projection, we should talk about how we can expand on this. Maybe something else is worth killing, right? And so remember what we kill, right? Think about opportunity cost. If we keep things that aren't effective lingering, that's taking away from things that could be amazing for us. And so it's important to think about that, especially as a product person, because our decisions in that realm dictate how good we are to the engineers and designers we tend to work with. And so in 2017, they went from no data clarity, gut-based decisions, and didn't know what data to trust, to data being upfront, and the confidence in data increased the tension early in projects before people were too invested. This is another important point. Thinking about Jeff Bezos, and one of his best ideas about how strong teams work is this concept of disagree and commit. Meaning, in the beginning, we all have our own incentives. We all have our own needs. We all have things we want to accomplish, but we have limited resources. So we need to get in there and feel comfortable fighting about what's important to us. And we can't do that without being data informed. However, once we make that decision, and once we come to a decision, we commit to it, right? And we understand that it's not about the people in the room, it's about the work. And that we have things in place that can help us understand, back to the fast part, back to knowing when to stop and pivot. We have mechanisms in place that will tell us when we're not going in the right direction. And so lastly, there's being politically safe. So if we have to talk about the company that we're in. What is our culture? So our culture is about who we are, what we represent, what we care about. And so in some of these, you see that, right? For example, in this stop statement, Bobco really cares about third-party sources. They care about where they get their data. And they feel like they should be asking their customers about their data at all times. So it's very clear that if we have to grab information from third-party sources, you should scrap it and invest the resources elsewhere, right? It's non-negotiable. It's a stop statement. I don't care how good the feature is. Let's be super clear about that. Pivot statements. If we haven't demonstrated our features to our marketing team, well, then we're not doing what we need to do. We're not being who we culturally are. And so product marketing felt like they were in a silo before. And so if we're not including them in 75% of our prototyping sessions, we need to sit down and talk about where our priorities are, right? They need to be a part of what we're doing. And so it's important that we make that a thing for us, right? And we're customer centric. So if they're sharing this, we'll invest more into whatever it is, right? We trust our customers. They guide us. So let's follow up with that, with how we resource, right? If we have a baseline and they're referring customers into it and they're loving it, then let's follow to what we believe in, right? Let's build something and invest in this. And so these company values weren't applied. They were just ideas on the wall before. And in 2017, they felt flimsy. They didn't feel real. But by 2019, the leadership saw their values in that development. And so they didn't do what people call poop and swoop, right? Leadership didn't come down and start applying edicts or telling people what to do. They were focused on what leadership is good for, which is vision setting. And the people working on this stuff saw that these pictures on the wall, these words, these, we're going to be fast and we're going to care and we're going to do this and we're going to do that, actually meant something, right? So they started caring about the brand that they work for. And even most importantly, I think to the marketplace that we're trying to serve, being very clear culturally creates differentiation. If we are who we say we are, we're different than our competitors just because of that. And if that reflects in our work, we're building a very clear brand that people can go and use, right? If you want to think about a brand that has done this well, right? Of course, the usual suspects like Apple are there, right? You know an Apple product, you feel it, you understand it. And a lot of that has to do with the company values being applied to the products that they create. And so how do we make this operational? Well, you got to ask yourself these questions and you got to go talk to people. And remember, product management's whole job, at least in my opinion, is to make sure that we're increasing the decision fitness of the company, meaning how are we helping the people around us to make better decisions more consistently? So these three questions, I think, get to the bottom of that and are variations on these. What are some non-negotiables for your team, right? What do they care about? What do other folks care about? If you can't name what people care about in your team, or things that they do not want to do, right? How well do you know them? Next is, how much are we willing to let this initiative cost us? There are things that our companies care about that they have to answer to a higher authority. Sometimes that's a board or investors or whoever, right? You're not going to get to the bottom of this if you do not directly ask, how much what's the cost? How far can we go? What's going to make us stop, right? And so those are your pivot type questions. And then lastly, what markers do we need to see to commit more resources to this initiative? If you do this long enough, you'll run into a boss and you'll say, I wish I was able to get one more X, whether that's one more engineer, designer, a little bit more money for research, whatever, right? And your boss is going to tell you, well, if you would have told us about X, Y, and Z, we would have gladly given you that money weeks ago, right? And that would have made your life a lot easier. And so you don't ever want to feel that, because that feels like a punch to the gut, right? There was something that somebody could have given you to make your life easier and you didn't get it. So it's worth asking that question up front. Next thing you want to do is translate those answers, right? Folks are going to give you stories, they're going to give you qualitative data, and sometimes they give you quantitative data. But your job as a product manager is to understand the environment that you're in. Remember, Jill took 6 months to sit there and understand the systems that she was working with. For you, it's the same, right? You can kind of translate things into metrics or things that people care about, and then go back to them and ask, like, is this what you mean, right? These conversations should be ongoing. And you want to prioritize them, right? The sweet spot is 5 to 7 of these at any time. Too many of them, and then folks it's going to turn into white noise. Too less of them, then it's going to turn into white noise. About 5 to 7 are good because it can give you good coverage on things that are data informed and politically safe. And lastly, you want to communicate these things, right? You should talk about them over and over and over again. You want to become a broken record as it relates to these survival metrics. And like all things agile, right, it's important that you create a cadence. So you want to talk, translate, and prioritize, and do that over and over and over again. Because the important thing about strategy, or anything that you're going to hear, right, whether it's me or another thought leader, is if these things do not live with the people that you're telling them to, if it doesn't affect what they're doing, then it doesn't matter. So constantly ask yourself, are these survival metrics affecting product development? Are they giving me a good understanding of what's important and what's not, and what's worth stopping? Because if they aren't, and they aren't provoking or thought-provoking, then you probably need others. And that's why this cadence is important. As you do this and do it more, you'll be in a situation where you'll get better as a company, understanding what's important and what's not, what values matter, what don't, what data is important, what isn't. And so you'll get sharper at the pillars as you do this over and over again. Right? There's a generative effect in working through this cadence. So speaking of working, how do you know it's working? Well, these are 3 questions you can ask yourself. Are we able to react to our current circumstances fast enough to build more market share, right? We're in business to be in business. Are we reacting and responding, right? Or are we just going with the flow? Do teams feel more informed enough to challenge first ideas? Being data informed comes with confidence, right? It's even in statistics, confidence, right? We want to be more confident. And as people feel more confident in the data that they're receiving, they're able to adjust to the things that are happening. And remember, have you ever had an MVP that has worked and has been perfect? The answer is more than likely no. If you have, please email me. I need to know your secrets, right? I think for the rest of us, it's important to iterate over and over again. And so we have to challenge our first ideas. And then lastly, our company values translating into initiatives. Are we making things that people care about and reflect us? Because if we're just doing what's best without putting up any walls, then we're just becoming a commodity, right? Which is the thing a business does not want to do. You don't ever want to wake up in an environment where everything feels the same except the colors, because what you have is a very, what they call red ocean, right? It's extremely competitive, race to the bottom, right? And so when you start playing in the discount game, you've already lost as a business. And so what I've seen teams get better at, on the individual level, teams are able to decide faster. They feel safer in making those decisions and discussing, and comfortable using data. For teams, the power to kill is very empowering, right? Values tied to incentives and shared language help people move faster and better. And on the organization level, there's faster vision navigation, meaning we can see what we care about out further than generally what we talk about on the leadership level. Our true values are revealed, and then higher investment confidence, especially for those on the C-suite level, right? Or higher level on in bigger companies, director and above. Things like mergers and acquisitions, right? Do we fit with that company, or does that company fit with us? Those decisions get a lot easier when you start to understand your true values. And so Bobco spent 2 years almost wasting time, right? They spent a lot of time focusing on things that didn't matter and fell behind. But once Jill came into the picture and brought survival metrics with her, along with the tenets of being fast, data informed, and politically safe, they were building things that the market had a need for. And their value system was tied to every release. They were a lot more competitive because they were different. As a team internally, they felt more connected. They were able to disagree, and they were able to walk away. If things didn't work, they knew that they were trying to get to the best idea. It wasn't a personal attack. And leadership saw their values translated. They saw that what people worked on matched what they thought, the company that they built, what they're trying to do. And so leadership felt safer, more secure. And so that's it, right? Because just by figuring out how things can survive and doing it often can give your team the opportunity to thrive. And that's where we all want to be. So really quickly, if you have your phone out, or if you're watching this in the future, I love feedback. There is a QR code. Please scan that and fill out the survey. And when you fill out the survey, I will email you a gift. Some more reading, some background, some stuff, some this, some that. And then there's also an opportunity to sit and talk with me about survival metrics for 45 minutes. So if you want to do that, please, I will give a minute. I will be quiet. Take out your phones and go for it. I also just passed a link over here in the background. Ricardo maybe can pass it to the chat for folks to be able to take a look and get in. If you're on the computer, feel free to jump in there.
Thank you, Adam. It was a very good presentation. We are also collecting some Q&As to do right now. I'm gonna put the slider. You can go to slido.com 432580, slido.com 432 580. Pueden hacer sus preguntas en español o en inglés, como prefieran. Igual las vamos a ir leyendo. Entonces, we have some questions already. Let me take a look at them. Okay, one of the first ones is how to start with data. Una pregunta de Jaime. Me imagino, I think it's people that are doing gut-based decisions, like what are the first steps that they can take to be more data informed?
Awesome. So data generally works like this, whether it's in platforms or for ourselves. There are three levels. There is reporting, right, which is understanding the data, which is probably where you are, right? There's insight, and then there is prediction, right? So at the reporting stage, one, I'll give you a book recommendation, How to Measure Anything, which is a phenomenal book that can talk to you about this. But a couple of things in that book to help you start with data is the idea that some data is better than no data, right? I think teams overthink data, like you have to have a data analyst and you gotta go to you gotta create a tables and you gotta get a database and you gotta do this. No, sometimes it's as simple as just on the qualitative side, just asking a question and recording the answers and talking to people. And on the quantitative side, it's just going on Google and creating a Google poll and just sending that out to people and seeing what responses you get. So for folks that have done statistics, especially on the quantitative side, what you want to do is when you get those answers, get rid of the top answer and the bottom answer, and that should move you closer into understanding what you're doing, right? Depending on the number. Right? So if you're under 10, remove the top and the bottom. 20, remove the sec 2 and the 2 under. Just as a really quick way of doing that. So yeah, how to get started with data? Collect some, right? Sometimes it's just really as simple as that, and you'll get closer to it.
Good. There's another question about the time to track those metrics. Like if you track them so often, they don't move enough, and if you don't track them soon enough, you cannot make improvements. So what are your recommendations in that aspect?
Right. So I think a sprint is generally a good time, right, to see how things move and thinking about the sprint prior and the sprint ahead. So for a lot of teams, that's between 2 weeks to a month, right? And if we're doing say you're doing something like dual track agile, you're doing some discovery sessions inside of those 2 sprints, and you're able to either ask internally or externally what's going on with these numbers. And again, if nothing's happening with those numbers in that range of time, right, how much is it affecting your development? So it's probably time to go back and get some other questions if things aren't moving in that way, right? If you're having those conversations and nothing is changing, unless it's a red button. And eventually for things, what I call red buttons are things that are just non-negotiable. They're never going to change. And so for those, you can probably put to the side and just have like kind of your red button list, right, where you're going to stop production. But and that's for survival metrics part 2, right? We'll talk about that. But I think in general, if it's not affecting your production within 2 sprints, then it's time to move on and find something different.
Okay, there's other question about data, like how do you make it contagious, the being data informed to other people in the team, and not like the PM pushing to be data informed and the other people not caring about it? How do you make them care?
So I think the power of story is very important here, right? People care about stories. So what story are you telling around the data that you have? And how does it affect their incentives, right? So if you pile a story, you take a story and you take what they care about and you combine the two, people are going to listen generally. And so as a PM, that's why it's another reason that's important to go figure out what people's incentives are. Because if they care about revenue and you're telling a story about, I don't know, infrastructure, of course they're not going to care, right? But if you're matching a story and you're creating villains for them and you're creating heroes around the data points that you have, they're going to listen and they're going to want to go with you, right? And so that's part one. And part two is like when data wins, talk about it, celebrate those wins, right? Whenever you do something with data and it brings a powerful result back into the company, whenever there are company-wide communications or even something as simple as like a Slack channel, right? In general, and you just say, hey, we measured this, it made us change that, which resulted in that, and this, right? Can do wonders, right? People start caring about the data. They start seeing how it affects them. And then right from there, people tend to get more excited.
Good. There is another one, but this one is about the political safety. It's like when let's say the environment was not the best, but people are changing. Like when Jill started in the company in your example. How can you convince people that now they can speak freely and that their voices will be heard?
So that has a lot to do with the Jill in that example, right? And how she can advocate with leadership to start taking responsibility. So part of this is going to be on the leadership team, right? Like if the leadership team is not ready to step up and do this first, then right, there's not much you can do. And I would probably advocate for you to leave if they are in the middle of changing and they have made a commitment to do that. Then it's working with the Jill type person in the company, working with her in her timelines, right? Like you can even have a meeting and say like, hey, this is, teach me some of your secrets, or like, how have you seen change, right? And just use her as an ally to help you bring that type of change to your part of the organization. The good news about this is these things are contagious, right? So when a leader comes in with a lot of authority and has a mandate like Jill has, they come in, what they're looking for are partners. And so if you raise your hand and say you're a partner, you're probably going to have some shielding around what would normally happen before that person, especially during that honeymoon phase, right? And so it's an opportunity to talk to that Jill person, get to know them well, tell them what you're trying to do, and they'll probably help you create a better environment inside of your own circle. And then you can lean on that Jill type person to help with your leader. If they are open, right? If they're not open and they don't want to hear it, then I would suggest leaving. But if they have made the effort to change, right, then partnering with that leader with a mandate and then bringing that other leader in can work wonders.
Great. Oscar, I don't know if you have any other questions.
Yeah. I think we have a last question here, Adam, and it's regarding prioritization on how to prioritize these metrics, because I mean, prioritize is a big issue in organizations, so how to define the variables for use in the prioritization process, like it is always the sales or the impact, but how to measure that impact. I mean, how to define those variables.
I hate that this is the answer, but it depends. But
I know.
I think, but some baselines that you can take with you, back to what the company cares about, right? There are public communications somewhere. The CEO is saying something, or it's probably lost if they're not great at communicating. It's somewhere, right? Like at Smart Recruiters, I'm lucky enough to have a CEO that has written a book, right? So go read the book, right? Or go find that document deep inside of wherever you got to find it, right? Because that's going to be your golden document, right? In terms of prioritization, right? Because if somebody says, "Hey," if you tell somebody you prioritize based on the CEO, what can they say, right? Right? There's something there. There's a methodology or something around your company that makes it special. Start there, right? Start with what the company says they are, and then come with that information and say, "Hey, we claim to be this. This is how I want to prioritize. Is there something different here, right? That I need to change that's closer to reality." And so I think if you have a great relationship with your director of product or your head of product, that's a great conversation to have with them, because it's going to force them to do some leadership, right? Like, okay, what's real, what's not, and how do we figure that out together as a product team? I think other than that, right, there's a reality that there are more powerful teams than some other ones, and in order to get people to feel heard, sometimes you're going to have to kneel a bit into the reality of those that are more powerful, right? Sometimes we work at sales-led organizations or engineering-led organizations. You're not going to get anywhere if you don't have them on your side, right? And so whatever the hard part is in prioritizing and getting them on board first is realistically kind of where you're going to have to go in order to build the trust to move on. So right now in my organization, what I'm helping my PM see is, hey, these are the groups that are powerful. You're going to go start presenting to them on a regular cadence to build that trust and to understand what's important to them. And then you're going to prioritize based on that to build that trust. And then you're going to turn around and have the authority to tell them no, right? Once we get that authority to be able to tell them no, everything else should fall like dominoes, right? And so that's how I think at a very high level to think about priority is it's half a political game, right? And then there's also probably some things that the company cares about. And again, it's true that a lot of these things aren't very visible. As a product person, CEOs love to think they're product people. So you probably have a direct line to the CEO, even if they don't say it. So, even if they don't have it, just sit with them and say, okay, what do you find important? Right. And go from there.
Okay, cool. Thank you. I think you're muted, Ricardo.
Yes, again. Well, time's up, Adam. So thank you for your presentation. It was very good having you from New York City. Here are your contact data. If anybody wants to contact you, he's very approachable in Twitter. That's how we got this presentation. So ahí tienen, esos son los datos de Adam. Pueden contactarlo por Twitter o por alguna de sus redes. Él responde bastante por allí. De ahí fue donde sacamos esta presentación. La grabación queda en el canal para que la puedan ver los que quieran. Thank you again, Adam. It was very nice having you, and thank you for the public for being here with us. Gracias a todos. Hasta luego.
Ciao, ciao. Thank you so much, Adam. Bye.